Welcome back to We Need to Talk, where I give you the skills and tools you need to love better so you can live better. If you've had a few long term relationships, you probably expect the wild passion from the beginning to fade over time. It's a little bit of a trade off. You accept that in exchange for diminishing fireworks, you get the comfort and security that comes from being in a stable, committed relationship. But what if you didn't have to have that trade, one for the other? What if there was a way to keep the passion alive for years, decades, or maybe forever? This episode is based largely off the work of Dr. Arthur Aron, a research professor of psychology at Stony Brook University. Aron is known in the world of academia for his research on the ways people develop and maintain really close relationships. But he is best known for a New York Times article that went viral a few years ago called To Fall in Love with Anyone, Do This, which features a list of 36 questions, which, according to Aron, can provoke two strangers to fall in love with each other. When I read that article and Aaron's list of 36 questions, I wasn't surprised that it resulted in strangers feeling, at the very least, deeply connected. It reminded me of something that I regularly experience when I begin working with a new client. So, when a new client and I agree to work together, the first thing I do is I complete something called a biopsychosocial assessment. It's basically a really long session that's designed for me to learn my client's entire history so that A, I know all their major life events from day one, and B, so I can help direct where to begin our work and ensure that our goals progress in a way that's manageable for my clients and aligned with the reasons why they sought out therapy in the first place. I will say that an unintended byproduct of that assessment is an acceleration of intimacy between us. I ask about 14 pages worth of questions, which allows my client to tell me the story of their life. And by the end, I often know as much about them or more than their close friends. And it tends to result in a solid bond between us, which creates the foundation for the relationship to grow over time. The outcome is somewhat analogous to the research that Aaron conducted years ago. Only his study, as I mentioned, was intended to provoke two strangers to fall in love. So, here's how his study went. A pair of strangers meet in person for 45 minutes, and they engage in self disclosure and relationship building tasks that increase in intensity over time. By the end, he hypothesized people would fall in love. Today, I'm going to draw from his study and from my almost 28 years of professional experience as a therapist to make the case that if this construct works for strangers, it can deepen the intimacy and bond between you and any person that you want to be closer with. And it just might reignite that magical spark that we call love. So let me start by walking you through my thoughts on why Aaron's study and why my assessment are both consistently effective in accelerating the formation of a bond between people who don't know each other. The beginnings of any relationship involve telling a stranger the story of your life. There is something very powerful about going through the process of that self disclosure. And what I'm hypothesizing is that the power comes from reflecting on the past, putting it into your own words with your own spin to paint a picture for someone about who you are. There is something uniquely gratifying, especially in our culture of limited attention, when you have someone who's genuinely interested in learning about you, in getting to know you. And there's also something a little magical about getting to decide which of your stories get told and then choosing which to leave out. In being given the opportunity to connect the dots between what's happened to you in the past and how that's shaped who you are today. We don't get that opportunity very often. First of all, most of us think it takes way more time than it really does. But even if you were to back time out of it, the idea of having to tell someone your life story can certainly feel daunting and overwhelming, like you don't even know where to begin, unless there's an actual framework for it, like Aaron's 36 questions and my longer than life assessment. I'll be honest with you. Doing my assessment is actually the least favorite part of my job. It is a necessary task that I do because it's what we're trained to do. And because without it, I would forever be filling in gaps and then course correcting my understanding of the sequence of events and names and places and dates. And for me, with my ADD, it would just be way too distracting. I'd be piecing together major life events throughout, I guess, the first months or even years of my time working with a client. So I like to get it out of the way in the beginning so that we can hit the ground running session one. But it feels constraining. It is not creative. I want to freestyle, but I don't because my process works for my clients and it works for our relationship. So let's drill down on Aron's process and see if I can't hack an application that you can use to dial up the spark in your relationship. So here's what you need for this to work. Step one, think of these as prerequisites. These are things that need to be in place for this to work. In a way, it's easier to do this with a stranger because you don't have to worry about all these prerequisites. But you're not here because you're looking for easy. You're here because you want the relationship of your dreams and you want to blow oxygen into your relationship. And sometimes that's hard. Okay, so here's the deal. The first thing that needs to be in place is that you guys have to be okay. You and your partner need to be at least okay. Like maybe you're a little bored with each other, but there aren't like major issues in the relationship that wouldn't get in the way of this experiment. The next thing is you yourself need to be okay. You need to be okay emotionally. So if you struggle with anxiety or depression or anger or moods or significant insecurity in general, that is going to impact your relationship and how you show up in it. So make sure that you're keeping your mental health healthy. And one note on being insecure, insecurity can be really corrosive in a relationship because if you have low self esteem, which is associated with feeling chronically insecure, it's hard to feel like your partner actually likes you. If you drill down on your insecurities, they generally all distill down to the element of the fear that the person doesn't like you. And it is really tough to be happy in a relationship and also to feel like your partner doesn't like you. I'd argue that the two of those things are oxymorons. They don't go together. So you have to fix the one before you can hope for the other. I want to underscore this point right here. Who your partner is, that matters, but it matters way more who you are, how emotionally fit you are. So that is why I am always underscoring, both with my clients and with you, my listener, that the greatest work you can do in service of all of your relationships is making sure that you're okay, that your mental health is being managed and improved upon. The last prerequisite is this: you need to have a routine for managing your own stress. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but Aron's research underscores how detrimental stress is to a relationship. And since there is no way to be alive, my friend, without stress, I am telling you, you need to develop things that you will do every week, multiple times a week, to de stress yourself regularly. I'll tell you what I tell my clients to do. I want most of my clients either doing cardio 30 minutes a day, a minimum of 4 times a week, or I want them walking as close to 10,000 steps a day, every day. And ideally, those steps happen outside. The sun and nature will do for your mental health what a clean diet does for your physical health. Now, when the weather sucks, you can certainly use light therapy to compensate for not going outside. And I can put a link in the show notes on the one that I use. And I generally have it on in the corner of my desk from like October to March. All right, here's step two: relationship skills. If you've been listening to this for any amount of time, you are well versed in my passion for relationship skills and my belief in and the research's validity in the premise that you need a basic understanding of and a basic ability to use relationship skills to have luck in any relationship. It's funny that I use the word luck. It's not luck. They're skills, they're teachable, they're learnable. Now, ideally, both you and your partner have a working knowledge of relationship skills. But here I'm going to say, remember that the work I do is with individuals. I do not work with couples. I teach relationship skills to individuals. And through that work, relationships are transformed. It only takes one person. So, here is a list of the relationship skills that you need to have in place. I don't have time, and you probably do not have the attention span for me to delve into each one, but I'll give you little tips on how to employ some of these as I list them out. So, topping my list of relationship skills is communication skills. You need to know how to listen, you need to know how to talk, and you need to be able to do both of those things effectively. That is called active listening and appropriate communication skills. Basically, here's the takeaway: anyone you're talking to wants two things from you. They want to know that you're truly listening to them and that you're not like three steps ahead, figuring out what you're going to say in response. So they want to feel like you're pacing with them and that you're in this with them and that you're not impatient to get done with it. And they want to know that the way they feel makes sense to you. They want to be heard and understood. And we do that through two things called mirroring and validating. When we mirror, we tell the person, we're the listener, we tell the person who's speaking every few sentences what we're hearing them say. We say, so what I hear you saying is, the sky is blue, the birds are flying. Is that right? And the person then responds and says, yes, that's right. And then you say, okay, I'm listening. Is there more? And you encourage the person to continue. They say a few more sentences, you do that thing back to them. You're basically summarizing or paraphrasing what you're hearing them say. Validating is where you tell them that what they're saying to you makes sense to you. And the way you do that is you say, here's a sentence stem that you're going to use. It makes sense to me that you feel insert feeling here because tell them why it makes sense to you here. And I'm holding up air brackets for those. So the sentence stem again is, it makes sense to me that you feel XYZ because ABC. And you put it in your own words. Guys, in every conversation between reasonable human beings, you can find something about the other person's feelings that makes sense to you. That doesn't mean you agree with them. That doesn't mean that you would do the same thing if you were in their position. It means that somebody who has even a marginal ability to engage in abstract thought should be able to put themselves in somebody else's shoes and identify that it makes sense that they would feel that way. We have all felt every emotion that there is on the spectrum, even emotionally constipated people. I promise you this. So you don't actually have to have experienced what the person has experienced to identify with the emotion, because emotions are universal and we have felt them all. So validating has nothing to do with agreeing. When we validate, we're just letting them know that we understand where they're coming from. Another part of effective communication skills is that we take turns. We don't interrupt each other during a serious conversation. We do not interrupt each other. And there's got to be a way to cue your partner in when it's a serious conversation. And there's a tool in imago therapy called the dialogue. And Steph, my wife, who is certified in that as a couples therapist, has suggested over the years, and we have used this over the years, the two of us, that when it's a serious conversation, ideally you schedule them, but sometimes they happen on the fly. And when you find yourself in the midst of them, and even pros do, this happens, I don't know, once a month. I really try to avoid it from happening, but it definitely happens like about once a month. When you find yourself in the middle of a serious conversation, to cue the other in and say, should we use the dialogue? And by that, for us, that means you're going to mirror, you're going to validate, and you're going to really watch your manners during this. You're really going to watch your relationship skills. It cues both of us in that this is not freestyling, that we know how to manage this, we teach how to manage this, and we're committing to doing this properly. So we take turns. And that's the deal. That is communication skills. Next, we have conflict resolution skills because everyone fights. You need to be able to have difficult conversations. Now, by the way, none of us want them. I don't want them. People often think that, oh, I'm conflict avoidant. I've never met somebody who really likes having serious conversations. Even people who have chips on their shoulder, they don't necessarily go out there consciously looking for trouble. They provoke it or create it without knowing it. I've never met somebody who's like, yeah, I really love to go at it with people, or I really, interpersonally. It's one thing if you do that for a career, it's another thing to do it when the stakes are higher in one of your personal relationships. So I want to disabuse you of this notion that if you don't like conflict, it's because you're conflict avoidant. That's called being human. And you don't get a pass in having serious conversations just because you don't like conflict. None of us like conflict. So when you know how to have a serious conversation, when you know how to resolve hurt feelings, you actually mostly stay out of conflict. One of the most important parts of managing conflict and knowing how to resolve it is knowing when you are too escalated to continue to talk. There are times when you need to hit pause for maybe a few minutes or maybe a day, and you need to know how to do that. I like to tell people the rules of engagement are this. Picture a thermometer that ranges from 0 to 10. 0 is neutral on discomfort, 10 is the most discomfort imaginable. This is just your emotional discomfort scale. I don't want you having a serious conversation if you're at a 3 or higher. Now, I know that that sounds like there's not much margin for error. Most of us feel like we're still okay at a 4, 5, or 6. Exactly, you are. That is why I don't want you having these conversations when you're at a 3 or above. And the reason is this: once you're at a 5 or a 6, you're hanging on to the part of your brain that can contemplate the consequences to the way you're speaking and behaving. You are hanging on to that part of your brain with white knuckles. It takes nothing to completely get disengaged from that part of your brain and wind up in your amygdala, which is the part of your brain that keeps you alive and cannot contemplate the consequences of your actions. I don't ever want you in your amygdala. And so, what I teach my clients is I want you at a 0, 1, or 2 if you're engaging in a serious conversation. And there's a bunch of ways that you can de escalate yourself if you find yourself higher than that. But the easiest way is to step away. Step away, try to calm yourself, and bring yourself back in. I'm not going to go into the weeds on explaining that tool here, but I'm telling you, having a serious conversation is a hard thing to do. For that, you need to be grounded. To be grounded, you're at a 0, a 1, or a 2. If you're above that, you step away, you hit pause. And then another part of conflict resolution are rules to fair fighting, which brings me to the things that you don't do during a disagreement. You do not criticize. I want you to make requests of your partner rather than offer feedback, which I'm saying in air quotes. Your partner will not hear the feedback as neutral feedback. They will feel criticized. So rather than telling them what they do wrong and then having a part 2 to that, or failing to even do part 2, which does not provide your partner with a roadmap to meeting your needs, just get to the point. Skip the bitching about what they're doing wrong and just get to the point and say, hey, I would love it if you'd make the bed since you're the last one out of the bed every day. But instead of bitching about having to make the bed and wishing your partner did make the bed or doing whatever it is you do when your partner does something that annoys you, skip the negativity. Just tell them what you would like. So often, my clients will tell me stories that they had a disagreement with their partner. I, of course, drill down on it like at a molecular level. And so often I'll hear, well, it started with, they did that thing again. And I'm like, tell me what you said. Tell me how you let them know that they did that thing again. And they'll be like, well, I told them they did that dumb thing again. And I'll be like, And did you tell them how to do it differently? They'll be like, no, but it's obvious. Okay. A, it's not obvious. And B, sometimes we need our partners to spoon feed us medicine by telling us exactly what to do. Because see above, it's actually not obvious. So skip the feedback and go right to the request. So there you have it. That's criticism. Don't do it. Contempt. Contempt is an emotion that is predicated on a belief that we are morally superior than someone, than our partner. Stop acting like you're morally superior to your partner because you are not. And that is corrosive and toxic. And I never use those words. That is unhealthy, corrosive, and toxic. And it is actually the greatest predictor of divorce. So if you struggle with feeling contempt, I want you to know that you've got a lot of work to do on yourself before you can engage in any of these activities. You're not morally superior to your partner. I got news for you. And the things that annoy us the most of our partners or in our partners, they're usually things that we've struggled with in the past and have gotten past, or things that we're blithely unaware that we do in the present. So, if you struggle with contempt, that's something to work on with an individual therapist. And you're going to put pause on this. Next on my list of fair fighting is defensiveness. Look, we all feel defensive. That's a normal human emotion. But if you act defensively, your partner is literally going to avoid telling you the truth. They'll become avoidant. So you want to try and dial up your curiosity when your partner is describing either their experience or their perspective. You want to try and become curious about it rather than reactive to it. And again, if that's something that you struggle with, if you struggle with any of these four things that I'm describing under these things that you don't do in a relationship or things that you don't do when you're having a fight, um, this exercise is not for you. You have to go into some individual therapy to fix that or couples therapy because it speaks to some fractures in the relationship and those have to be mended for this to work. Okay. The next example of what you're not to do during a fight is called stonewalling. When you stonewall your partner, there is no engagement, there is no active listening, and it is one of the worst response styles that you can have. So, what do I mean by stonewalling? I'm talking about shutting down, withdrawing, giving the silent treatment, or basically like icing your partner out. When my clients experience this in relationships, I will encourage them to try and work with their partner for a period of time. And if it doesn't improve, I shrug my shoulders and I tell them that the research confirms over and over and over again that is one of the worst response styles in a relationship. You can be upset, but mature adults engage in the relationship, even if they're upset. The same way we do at work when we're pissed off at our bosses. You don't get to like scowl and turn your back away from your manager. And you don't get to do that in a healthy relationship. Now, there are some ways to resolve conflict effectively without getting a PhD in relationship skills training. But of course, I want you to get a PhD in relationship skills training. But I'm going to give you the hack anyway, because I want you to know all the ways to do it. Maybe use the hack temporarily while you're building the relationship skills. So you have to figure out what works for you. But here are two ways to do it. And they both involve using your imagination as a way of keeping you in check. Pretend a third person is in the room. We all save our worst behaviors for those times when we are completely alone. Why? Because we would never behave the way we do behind closed doors if there was somebody watching. I will often pretend that the apartment is a reality set, that I can imagine that if everyone's being caught on camera, somehow I behave better. The point is, figure out what imaginary scenario would help you behave well. And then you don't have to take a course on relationship skills because intuitively we know what's acceptable and what's not. And how do we know that? Because we don't act the way we do in front of strangers or in front of anyone the way we do when it's just us and our partner. You just have to ask yourself, Who would need to be in the room for me to keep me in check? And for me, the answer is anyone. Anyone watching would bring out a better version of me than when I'm alone with my wife. So that covers the relationship skills. And here I'm going to say if you're in a long term relationship and it's okay, chances are your relationship skills are good enough. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be at a neutral place with each other. The relationship would not be okay. You wouldn't have met that first prerequisite. So, step one was the prerequisites. Step two is having and being able to utilize relationship skills. Step three is called time. Mindfully carving out time, both as a couple, as an individual, and in who you surround yourselves with. So, as a couple, you need to be dating. You and your partner need to leave the house together. You need to go outside of the house. You need to do some of the things that you did early on in the relationship. You need to date. You need to date regularly. You need to date at least a couple times a month, ideally once a week. And on these dates, you need to try and find the part of you that can be playful. So, what happens in long term relationships is that most of us cohabitate, and a lot of the daily grind we expose our partners to. So they see us grinding through our day, and the magical stuff, which is the stuff that caused them to fall in love with us in the first place, that stuff is relegated to memory because we stopped dating. It happens to virtually everyone. So we get rid of the good stuff, which was the dating. Then our partners see us grinding through our days and weeks and months and years. So I need you to try and access the part of yourself that was playful in the beginning of the relationship. Now, even if you're not a goofball like me and you're not comfortable making fun of yourself the way I am, and you're not like trying to entertain people 24/7 the way I am, even if that's not inside of you, there was a carefree part of yourself early on in the relationship. And I want you to try and find an activity, or maybe it's music. Maybe you listen to a playlist before you go on a date and it puts you in the same frame of mind that you were in when you used to first date your partner however many years ago. A playlist is actually an interesting idea. I just came up with it on the fly. And here's why I love it and I think it's going to work is because if you go back in time to the date and year, the season and the year that you first met your partner in, just see what your favorite songs were from that era. You can just Google that shit and it will bring you back into a place of nostalgia. That is how I want you to do that. So if you're not somebody who knows that there's a playful part inside of them, and I'm telling you, I need you to dial up a carefree part of yourself when you're going on these dates, that's what I want you to do. I want you to find your favorite songs from that era, and I want you to make yourself a playlist, and I want you to listen to the playlist, even if you have to do it in earbuds, because letting your partner know that you're like trying to get yourself in a state of mind that's psychologically enhancing the relationship feels a little too dorky. I get that because I can really be such a dork if you've not noticed. Um, but not everybody can go there. So do it in earbuds. But I need you to try and be carefree and playful on these dates. Now let's talk about the dates. I need you to engage in novel activities, new activities that the two of you have never done together. They work the best. Aron's work has illuminated that what you do, if it's novel, it is just such a bigger bang for your buck in terms of the dopamine hits that you're going to get and the serotonin that you're going to feel and the likelihood that you're going to light up those old neural networks that were lit up when you first got with your partner. Novel, new things, ideally things that neither of you have done before, because it's going to create bonding between the two of you. Because when you're in an unusual situation, you will turn towards each other naturally. If you're okay, that's the prerequisite to even doing this. So here I'm going to say that one of the things that Aron's research also illuminated is that boredom and stress is a combo that is really bad in relationships. So just think about where we are in the course of history. Pandemic's behind us, but the 4 years leading into today, we're filming this in May of 2024. The 4 years leading into this date has, if you've been with your partner for that period of time or any of that time, has been riddled with stress and quite boring if you happened to have been in the pandemic. So, stress and boredom. And that is what we've been living in. And that is one of the most challenging scenarios his study shows that you can be in. And there's reasons for that. I think this is enough. I'm not going to go into all the reasons why, but I'm just letting you know there's reasons for that. Basically, big picture, here's the story. You cannot have a bird's eye view of how you're behaving or of what your longer term goals are when you are stressed out. When you're stressed out, you're very much in this moment and not in a mindful or good way. So your partner winds up seeing a version of you that you're not proud of. They get wounded by that, or they're not being fed through that. You're not able to show up the way they need you to. Maybe it's provoking fights between you. Under stress, it's really hard to connect and have a meaningful attachment, particularly long stretches of stress. So that is why it is imperative that if you've been together since the pandemic or for any period of time since the pandemic, this is particularly for you. So back to a novel activity or concept. Another way of doing this is to pick an activity that is particularly challenging. Studies show that what makes us fall in love while dating has very little to do with the person or what the specific activity is, but the extent to which the activity was new, novel, or challenging. It creates and provokes bonding between people. So, new, novel, or challenging, those are what you're looking for on your dates. Second part of mindful time, you need time for yourself as an individual. My same sex couples hear this from me day in and day out. And that is because when you're in a same sex relationship, you don't get to have a night out with the guys or a night out with the girls because the night out implies you're without your partner. But when they're the same sex as you, that excuse no longer flies. And as ridiculous as that sounds, you would just think that we'd find a different way around it. We haven't. I'm here to tell you. The gays haven't found a workaround for that. So what happens is we don't leave our partners. We never leave our partners because there's never a sex reason to leave our partners. You need time by yourself. I'm telling you, there's a mental health reason to carve out time for yourself. You know, one of the most valuable things a couples therapist ever said to me, and I do a lot of shitting on my old therapists. This one was a good one. She had Steph and me go out and engage in a new activity we've never engaged in before, but we couldn't do it together. We had to do it separately. And I was just like, so why am I in couples therapy if I'm doing something alone? But she's like, just do it. And so I did it. And I got to tell you, man, I came back to the dining room table that week when we had a specific time where we were each supposed to talk about our individual activities. And guess what happened? We had shit to talk about. It was amazing. We had new content to bring to the relationship because what happens in long term relationships is that our partners have heard all the stories before. There's nothing novel or new to bring to them, or we make assumptions that they don't want to hear it. So, carving out regular, consistent time for yourself to engage in an activity that has nothing to do with your partner, whether it's just hanging with your friends, seeing your family, but ideally, it's something that you're doing by yourself, for yourself, not just visiting family. And then the third part of time is finding time to be friends with another couple. It turns out that having a very deep friendship as a couple with another couple is super important. And when it comes down to doing Aron's 36 questions, which we'll get to, his research shows that when couples do it in a group together, it not only makes them closer to each other and to the other couple, but it increases their passion within each couple. So each couple feels more passionate for each other. It is very, very, very important to have other friends who are couples. Now, here's step four: touch. You have to engage in physical contact on a daily basis. You have to. The happiest couples that we've researched, happy 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, report feeling deeply in love with their partners. They report being touched every single day of their lives. And the touch feels legitimate, it feels wanted by the partner, and it feels honest. So there's nothing worse than being touched because somebody's being forced to touch you. So you have to, I'm not suggesting that you have to go out and engage in PDA. If that's not your jam, that's not your jam. Don't do that. But when you're home, you have to touch your partner. That is the distinction of that relationship from the others. And as long as we're on distinctions, you have to be having sex. You don't have to be having crazy, wild, passionate sex every day of your lives, but you do need to be having sex. People who are wildly in love are both fulfilled sexually. And his research, Aron's research, says that once a week for most people is just about the right amount. Now, I can hear all the groans from a lot of people out there. That's not going to be enough sex for a lot of people, and that's okay. But we're talking about the amount of sex that has the greatest impact on the couple. And if we're talking about that, what the research tells us is that once a week is that real important tipping point. Beyond that, you still, I mean, it's still great, but you get diminishing returns. I hate to use statistical language around sex and romance, but that's the deal. So you have to be engaging in physical contact every day, and ideally, you're having sex at least once a week. Now, step five: attunement. Now, I want you to recall that we are hacking an experiment that was designed for two strangers. The reason why this is so effective with strangers is that they don't have a pre existing impression of who we are or who each other is, which means they're open to allowing whatever version of the other person presenting themselves to present. To replicate this in your existing relationship is actually quite tricky. That's why I've hacked this into a 6 step process. You have to be open to wiping the slate clean, to engage in the presumption that whatever your partner tells you about themselves is true because it is their truth. And that blank slate that we get with strangers, by the way, I am betting is largely responsible for why this works so well. So, what that means is that when you do this with your partner, you have to really commit to starting with openness that you'd extend to a stranger. You have to be willing to treat them the way a stranger would treat them. You're not debating with them, you're not arguing with them, you're not course correcting their answers to his questions. You're genuinely just open to their story and receiving it. And it is in that process, that authentic process, the way in which you need to show up to this. If you do it like from the right groundedness and energy and spirit, they will feel that. That is why this is so plausible with strangers, because I don't know all the negative attributes of a stranger. So I'm not inwardly rolling my eyes when a stranger is telling me their life story because I don't know what parts of it I think are bullshit. You need to set aside the parts of yourself that are critiquing your partner or are inclined to critique your partner. And you need to just be willing to start from a blank slate like you're meeting them for the first time. The other thing is, you need to pay attention. This does not work if you're distracted or impatient or not fully present. Can you even imagine if, with a brand new client, I was asking questions about their life and I was like distracted? I mean, we've all been there, but I am not there during 99.9% of my sessions. I am not distracted in, and when I am, I label it. I own it. So we've all been there. And we've also been on the receiving end of misattuned people, which is to say, people who are distracted. And that ship feels the exact opposite of what you need for this experiment to work. You need to be very focused. You need to be not pressured for time, you as the listener, and you need to dial up your curiosity so that your partner gets the felt sense that you are attuned to them. Attunement means we get each other and we feel attuned to one another when the person we're talking to is not distracted, when the person we're talking to is not interrupting us, and when the person we're talking to is not fucking around with their gadgets, not moving around, not fidgeting around. So that is how we create attunement, a sense of attunement. Listening to them can't feel like an obligation, but something that's of interest in you. Otherwise, it'll feel like you're just phoning it in and it will not work. So I'd suggest the way to dive into Aron's questions is to carve out about an hour and decide that you're going to spend the hour taking turns answering each of his questions with your partner. All of his questions are going to be linked in the show notes below because I'm going to link that New York Times article that went viral. And they're just thought provoking questions that are fun to answer. They're nothing more than a framework to begin learning about your partner in a way that prompts curiosity and intimacy and maybe things you don't know. It's very possible you know the answers to a lot of these questions, but it's important to listen from the perspective of a beginner, like somebody who just met your partner. And the sixth step is creating the daily practice of catching your partner doing something right, which essentially is a gratitude practice. And then to scale that up, you will tell your partner what they did right or what you're grateful for. When I say you're going to create a daily practice of catching your partner doing something right, these are the other things, in addition to Aron's questions, that will help support your ability to compensate for the fact that this is not a stranger. Because actually, his experiment is much easier to do with strangers. We don't have the history with a stranger that we have with our partners. So I'm taking Aron's research, I'm hacking it into what I am I am very sure is an effective game plan to compensate for the fact that you have a million biases about your partner. They're not all good because your partner has a million biases about you that are also not all good. But I just need one of you to do it this way. If one of you does it this way, relationship skills, if I've learned nothing else throughout my career, I've learned this. They are contagious, good or bad. So if one person starts using really good relationship skills, they are contagious. So, what does it mean to catch your partner doing something right? It means that every day at the end of the day, you put maybe a little calendar notification that says journal, at the end of the day. Let that be the code word for what I'm telling you to do. This means catch your partner doing something right. You probably don't want to write that in your calendar. And then you just think about the day and ask yourself, what did they do right today? And then you write that down. And then maybe once a week, you tell your partner one of those things. If you really want to do it like at an accelerated pace, tell them every day, the next day. Hey, you know what I really appreciated about you yesterday? I really appreciated how you showed up for Johnny's game or whatever it is. Find something your partner is doing right every single day. And the more you can share that with them, the better they're going to feel about themselves. It is so impactful on long term relationships, and it's going to make you feel better because you then set your brain to hunt for evidence that your partner is doing stuff right instead of all the stuff that they do that drives you crazy. It creates such a positive cycle in the psyche, I can't even tell you. I said it was 6 steps, but here's extra credit. Extra credit is creating the practice of celebrating your partner's successes. It turns out that it is more important for us to celebrate our partner's successes. It has a bigger impact on them than being there when things are bad. That's quite counterintuitive to me, but this is Aron's research. The bottom line is this, which everybody in the science of relationships understands. We should not be stingy with praise of our clients. We should not be stingy with acknowledging the things that they're getting acknowledged for at work. If your partner gets a promotion, do not minimize these really important moments in your partner's life. Let's just say your partner is sober and they hit their first week, their first 30 days, their first 90 days. Every one of those gets celebrated. Celebrating your partner's little incremental changes and goals is everything. And partners tend to minimize positive reactions over time. Don't do that. Celebrating your partner matters more than supporting them when things go bad. The bottom line is that what is going to make this work is the framework that I've laid out for you, along with Aron's questions. Those are the prerequisites. As an individual, you're okay. As a couple, you're okay. And you have regular stress relieving exercises that you engage in, that you're able to properly show up in the relationship. You understanding you can use basic relationship skills. You set aside time to regularly engage in activities alone and with your partner. When you're with your partner, you're leaving the house, you're engaging in novel, new, and challenging activities. And you seek out and maintain a relationship with at least one other couple. You engage in physical contact on a daily basis, and you have sex regularly. And you commit to being attuned when you go through Aron's questions. And finally, you build the practice of catching your partner doing something right every single day. Now, if this seems like a lot of work, just remember that at first it requires a lot of thought, planning, and mindfulness. But the goal here is to create new daily habits. Once a habit's established, it doesn't require much to maintain, but building the habit, that's the bitch. But it's worth it because at the end of the day, at the end of your days, you will evaluate your life on how well you loved and were loved by others. That is all that's going to matter. So give yourself 30 days to implement this game plan. I have faith in this process, but most importantly, I have faith in you. We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling is a Sterling Standard production. This episode was produced by me. Editing and sound engineering by Bart Migal. Our theme music is by Trending Music. Special thanks to Amanda Christiani, Preston Smith, and Stephanie Sterling. If you know someone in a long-term relationship, be a good friend and share this episode with them. If you have a question or a comment, please feel free to email me at darcy@askdrdarcy.com. We'll be back on Tuesday with another episode packed with the relationship, dating, and mental health hacks you've come to expect. References, along with Aron's 36 questions, are linked in the show notes below. I'll see you soon.